You have reached the deepest depths of the internet. If it is greatness you seek, you've come to the wrong show. If it's about not wasting time, don't worry, you're never going to get your time back. If it's knowledge you seek, just be aware, any knowledge gained here is going to be minuscule. So now it's time for Accost with Tony Gerdeman on the Ozone Radio Network.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Across the Field. I am Tony Gerdeman here with Shannon Sommers and Tom Orr. Shannon is back. Shannon, how's it going?
I'm doing good. I see that, I leave for a couple shows and just everything goes to, goes Michigan on us.
Yeah, and I'll get to Tom in a sec because he's going to murder me, but I just wanted to apologize to everybody out there for the sound quality, my sound quality of late. It was a mistake that anybody could make. And I'm sure everybody has. I'm sure that everybody has made it. Just to give you an idea, I've got a mic here like a real mic that looks like a real mic. And I don't know for how long in my my recording software, I have not been using the mic. It's not one of the choices that I selected. So the mic that I have been using unknowingly was my laptop mic. And to let you even further behind the curtain, when Tom or Shannon have to produce and get the sound right, there's been an issue with my with my laptop fan, and it's too loud over the recording, and it's a big mess. So the last few weeks I've been trying to put my laptop as far away from the microphone that I thought I was using as possible, but all that ended up doing was taking me further away from the mic that was being used, and did nothing to muffle the sound of a fan because, of course, Tom, the call was coming from inside the house.
The really great part of all of this is that right now we don't know exactly how this is going to sound, because who knows if you actually fix what you're supposed to fix. But right now the listeners know. So it could be, we could right now have listeners listening to you say, we want to apologize, we fixed all the sound, and it still sounds like you're talking from inside like a tin can. I mean, I'm really excited to listen to this when it comes out tomorrow, because I can't wait to hear how it sounds.
I'm very hopeful. And again, I'm in all seriousness though, I do apologize to everybody. I hope you're still listening. Thank you to those of you who stuck through, because Tom, we've had some good shows of late. But I imagine it was a chore for people to get through. So, my apologies for that. And I'm even my wife was making fun of me, like before I told her, like, well, I got to go record. She's like, are you going to use your real mic today? Or are you going to use your laptop mic? And just really condescending, as wives are.
Well, it's been going on.
So hopefully this is working.
Yeah.
We all get the wives that we deserve, don't we?
Indeed we do. The whole practice of me like moving the laptop further away from the mic that I thought I was using reminded me of an old stand-up skit where there's a guy and his wife are like driving down the road, and they get their tire blows, but they don't know that it's the tire. They think there's a helicopter above them. And as they slow down and the tire and the thump slows down, they're like, now the helicopter's on top of us. So that's sort of what this was like. It was just a mess all around. And so thank you all for those of you who stuck it out. And hopefully this is better. If it's not, I'm just a simple man. I type, I don't record. And like I said, this could happen to anybody. This is not, and who's really to say whether it's my fault? There's a lot of blame that could go around. I'm not looking to point fingers. I'm above that. If I wasn't, there's plenty of fingers I could point. But let's just Tom, I know I don't have time for you to say something right now. We're just going to move right on into the show. So who's sending DMs now? Is that Shannon?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom. I know you got something to say.
I was just going to say, it's not your fault. You're not the producer. Who do we introduce as the producer every week? I forget. Who is that?
I didn't want to say nothing.
Well, I just think it's funny because for a few weeks, we're like trying to figure out how to fix his sound. And we're like, you do this, that, and this. And it's getting worse, Tony. Tony's getting worse.
It's getting worse because I'm moving further and further away from the stupid fan.
Oh, well.
But here we are. And
at least you can just look at your computer and say, no, John, no.
So let's talk a bit about football. Let's stop talking about recording it, and especially if the sound is still bad, then this is all wasted. But I think it'll be fine. Freshmen arrived this week, all 26. I think the last couple of them rambled on in today. Some of them had graduation this past weekend. 12 players on offense. I assume 14 on defense, depending on how things shake out with, Alex Williams, who looks like he'll start out on defense, and Cameron Brown may be back to offense because he and Zach Smith were tweeting, and sometimes those are the tea leaves that you have to read. Tom, did you see the picture of Brian Snead on Twitter this week?
Yes, he looks like he has spent a little bit of time in a gym.
Yeah, and in fact, when we're watching Master Teague in the spring, we're like, wow, he's a big dude. And then in the picture, Brian Snead is taller, bigger, but he's wearing a coat, so you don't want to judge too much. But where I will judge, Tom, is Ohio State has a running back who is wearing a coat in June. Is that good?
Maybe he's trying to cut weight. I don't know, like a wrestling thing. It could be.
Sounds dangerous. But yeah, when I asked Tony Alford what we should expect when Brian Snead arrives, he's like, well, you're going to see a good looking dude, probably come in around 210 pounds and, ready to work. And, that's what we saw there in that picture. Just a guy who looks like a Big Ten running back, and I'm sure is eager to get going. So since the freshmen arrived, I thought we would talk about, a few of them, maybe, who guys who maybe will stand out, or what I'm thinking is I want one confident prediction that borders on bold from each of us regarding at least just one of the freshmen, one random prediction. And I'll go first because I never do. I think Tyreek Smith is going to be in a defensive end rotation at some point. Does that mean like Chase Young last year? Yeah, I think so. I think that's what I'm shooting for, and that would be pretty impressive for him to be the number 5 guy like Chase Young was last year, and maybe can he unseat Jayshon Cornell as the number 4 guy? Tyreek Smith is a guy 6'3", 260-ish, very Taekwon Lewis-like, and I think he's a guy who could come in, and he's not just a pass rusher. He's an all-around guy, and I think they see the potential in him he's going to have to play next year, so maybe start getting his feet wet now, and I think he'll sneak in there. Maybe by the time the Big Ten Conference is in full swing, I think he plays around as much as Chase Young last year. I think maybe more than Jonathan Cooper. Shannon, you got one?
Yeah, I'm going to go with, Jeremy Rucker. I know when we talked about on the tight end show, you don't expect to see a lot coming from a tight end, and he has a lot of work to do probably on his blocking and stuff. But I just think his athletic ability of making some plays, if he's able to get open a lot, that and take advantage of some space down the middle there, that he's going to have a big season and open up some eyes. I mean, he's a 5-star coming in, and everybody's raving about how he's looking before he's even stepped foot on campus already.
If if we look at what CJ Saunders did last year without being able to quote, block, I think he had like 17 catches for 200 and some yards and some touchdowns. If Jeremy Ruckert is a guy that can't block, but they want to play, he could have some designs for, basically for himself. Like they want to put him in certain situations, and I could see Tom. I could see him getting involved in that way, where Kevin Wilson even said that he's not the blocker they need yet, but there's still some things that he can do.
Right, there's a role for him. You can, if he's not a complete player yet, and I mean, almost certainly he's not going to be, you can still utilize him in certain roles. I mean, we've talked about that with them, them using guys situationally and finding if this guy is good at this one thing or these two things, find a way to put them in that role where they can do that, and you're not exposing yourself to, deficiencies they may have elsewhere in their game. So, yeah, I could see that. I mean, I don't want Shannon to get too excited that we're like welcoming him back and saying he knows what he's talking about, but I could see that happening this year.
What do you think about my Tyreek Smith thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. There's not, I mean, the rotation is not so deep there that, he's got to, wade through, 7 other guys to get in that rotation. I would feel more confident in it if he was, if he'd come in for the spring, but, they really have basically 4 guys there right now. And so, yeah, I could see him. I mean, one guy gets injured, that there's a pretty good chance that he's in that rotation. So, yeah, I could see that happening.
All right, what do you got?
I have Master Teague. I'm going to go a little more since this is supposed to be the bold and spicy edition of freshman takes. I'm going to bump my number up a little bit. I think before when we talked about Master Teague, I said he'd have 350 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns. I'll go over 500 yards rushing for Master Teague and 8 touchdowns this year. I think he has a pretty good possibility of seeing some extended time in the second half of games. Without Antonio Williams here, I think there's a lot more carries that are going to be opened up. We've talked repeatedly about the fact that they're probably not going to run Tate Martell as much as they might have if they had, one more healthy scholarship quarterback on the roster. So I think there are going to be carries there for him. The only thing that I think might keep him from getting there is if they decide they want to use DeMario McCall a lot more in the rushing game, or if they decide they want to play Brian Snead pretty extensively this year too. He's, not having been in the spring probably hurts him a little bit. Maybe they want to redshirt him and space those guys out for a year. But, if Teague is kind of the clear-cut number 3 back, I think he has a pretty good chance of hitting 500 yards this year.
That's pretty interesting because some people might hear that and go, 500 yards, big whoop. But Mike Weber had 600 and some last year. So that'd be a pretty significant contribution when you look at, DeMario in 2016 had maybe like 250 yards rushing. And we've talked about that before, what the freshman running backs do. Ezekiel Elliott, maybe like 260 in 2013. So, I mean, that's pretty bold, but the carries should be there because, like you said, there's going to be a bunch of blowouts unless, they play Dwayne Haskins too much and don't play Tate Martell enough. But I mean, I think that's not too shabby. What I wonder though with Teague, like you said, with Snead and DeMario is going to be involved. How many carries will it take for 500? Because he's going to average 6 or 7 yards a carry. So you're talking maybe 80 carries spread out over 14 games, which is 5 or 6 carries a game. I think that might be on the high end of, I'm thinking maybe 3 or 4 instead of 5 or 6. Just spitballing here, but we've seen other guys come in and have, with a guy like Teague, when you command the football, and DeMario McCall as a freshman wasn't healthy, but they still wanted to get him out there. And when you've got Teague, who's completely healthy, capable of so many things, can go inside and outside, I like it. I don't know about 500, Tom. I'm not gonna chastise you or ridicule you like you did with my pick. But you went bold and I didn't, so I can't hold that against you. The other thing I wanted to talk about with the freshmen, just while we're talking about them, which of the freshmen will who's going to lead the freshmen in tackles, who's going to lead the freshmen in touchdowns, and Tom, I'm guessing it's Teague for you on the touchdowns, but it could also be Teague for you on the tackles.
It could be Teague for touchdowns for sure. I think that's freshman wide receivers generally don't contribute much, true freshmen, especially if they haven't come in early. So I think that's going to kind of take out like the Cameron Babb and Chris Olave and those guys. Jeremy Ruckert's a possibility, but I mean, I think you've always got a better chance of running up pretty good touchdown totals on the ground as opposed to through the air. So I think Teague is the safe bet for the touchdowns. On the tackle side, I'm going with Josh Proctor. He sort of fits the profile of the kind of guy that turns into a lot of times it's that corner or that safety that turns into the special teams ace, the gunner on the punts, or the guy who's making all the tackles on kickoffs. That was Jeff Okudah last year. That seems like that could be a Josh Proctor thing this year. And the depth at safety is such that he could very well be in the two deep at safety pretty early in the year. It's not like the guys who were trying to break into, Dallas Gant trying to break into the two deep at linebacker, where you've got like six proven guys in front of you who I think the coaches are all pretty comfortable with. Or the guys at defensive tackle, like Tommy Togiai at defensive tackle, like they're so deep at defensive tackle. He is obviously going to be a pretty good player for them, but there may just not be the playing time for him to make those tackles. Safety, I think, behind Jordan Fuller and presumably Isaiah Pryor on the other side, there's not things are not nearly as settled on the second team safety position. So I think there's a pretty good possibility that Josh Proctor gets on the field reasonably early on defense as well, and that helps kind of pad those tackle totals a little bit.
Yeah, those are the two guys I went with as well. I was wondering if maybe Taraja Mitchell could get in there because the middle linebacker spot, we don't know how settled. We know it's not very settled, but if they want to move Baron Browning back to the will at the start of the season or at some point, maybe before Tough Borland is ready, is Mitchell then your number two? Does he? There's going to be some special teams opportunities for him as well, but I think Proctor just on kick coverage alone. But then, like we talked about with Teague and blowouts, Proctor is going to be out there quite a bit now. And if you go look at the stats from last year, I think Eric Smith had 30 or 40 tackles, and that was as a backup safety who played on special teams. So there's definitely plenty of opportunities for a guy who isn't starting to have an impact at that position. Teague, I think that's the obvious one. But Shannon, did you go Jeremy Ruckert or did you go with the group?
Yeah, I would definitely went with Ruckert based on the fact that it's 6'5.5". If you're in the red zone, they might be able to hit him in the corner of the end zone. I mean, trying to have a linebacker trying to cover him, or even the deep ball might be his as far as linebacker not being able to cover him, and a safety might go over to the wide receiver, so he might be wide open. So I just might be Ruckert with the touchdowns. And then for tackles, I'm actually going between Toji and Banks, because I'm thinking Banks on special teams.
The thing is, though, Ruckert isn't Dwayne Haskins' roommate, Austin Mack is. So that's where all the red zone throws are going to go. That's what you do for your roommates. Like, you help out with
This is true.
utilities. You don't eat their Chinese in the fridge, and you throw them touchdowns. You throw them passes in the red zone. Tom, that's how it goes.
How long have they been roommates? I hadn't heard this. Is that new? Is that new information? Has that been reported on this podcast before? I'm not sure.
They became roommates. Oh gosh, let's see. They were boxing. They were both in the boxing club at Notre Dame. where they were dating. I'm not even gonna go there, but yeah, they met at the boxing club at Notre Dame and moved to Columbus, and yeah, they're roommates. So I expect, if we're talking red zone threats, I'm gonna go with Austin Mack, and in the corner with the from Mr. Mustard with the candlestick. I don't know. Anybody ever play Clue?
Yes.
Is this still 1983?
We just jumped from Tommy's, oblique Tommy Zibikowski references to Clue and I don't know what Colonel Mustard did to get drummed out of the army, but you're confusing him with Mean Mr. Mustard, R.I.P. South Campus Bar from 20 years ago.
Yeah, that even predates me. So I know I actually was there one time, but whatever. The Garrett Wilson, the Texas 5-star Texas wide receiver, tweeted this past week that he is planning to graduate early and enroll early. And if you think about all of the receivers that Ohio State is losing, Johnny Dixon, Terry McLaurin probably playing the same position as Garrett Wilson, and they're going to lose Paris Campbell, probably lose KJ Hill, may lose one of the X's, Austin Mack or Benjamin Victor. So coming in early for wide receiver, even though they're bringing in Chris Olave and Cameron Babb and Cameron Brown, who all play pretty much the same position as Garrett Wilson, but coming in spring, as we all know, coming in the winter, that gets you a head start, gets you through spring, lets you know what to prepare for and what to be ready for in the fall. And at a position where there probably won't be too many proven players, this is an opportunity for him to have an immediate impact as a freshman. And everywhere he goes, the people like the evaluators who watch him or whatever say he's the best receiver there. And if you've seen any clips, go to Huddle or go to YouTube and check in on Garrett Wilson, and you'll see he's not the biggest guy, 6 foot, 6'1", maybe 185 pounds, 195 pounds, but he's a guy. He's good after the catch. He pinpoints the ball up high. He can go up and get it. Won't necessarily impress you physically. Doesn't impose himself, but just a really good and talented playmaker, Tom, out wide for the Buckeyes next year.
People talk about guys kind of jumping off the film when you watch it. And he was someone who definitely did that, because the first time I saw him, I was watching someone else on that film. I was watching Matthew Baldwin, who's the quarterback who came to Ohio State in this 2018 class. And you're watching it, and then you're looking at this receiver going, man, this kid's pretty good. Like, you're watching it for the quarterback, but there's this kid making all these plays downfield. And who is this? And it was Garrett Wilson. And he is, Ohio State has, I think in the past, recruited a number of guys who are, more track guys and not necessarily like true receivers, guys who are just athletes who it's like, yeah, we'll coach them up, we'll get them to play. They've got the size, they've got the speed. We can teach them to play wide receiver, and sometimes that works, and sometimes it kind of doesn't. And I'm sure you can go through in your mind guys who it's like, if they could just put it together, and it never quite happens. So there have been a few of those. He does not look like someone who is going to have to put it together. He's got the ball skills. He makes guys miss. He's got speed to run away from guys playing big school, big division Texas high school football. So you're playing against top level competition in high school, and he pops off the film at you. So, I don't, even coming in next year, I don't know that I would think, project him for a monster season next fall. If he put up a few hundred yards receiving next fall, that would be a big year. 300 yards receiving next year as a true freshman would be a big year. That is one of the hardest places to get on the field as a true freshman. So just sort of set your expectations there accordingly. Coming in early next year sets him up to have a very big 2020, sort of make the leap in 2020 where you've then had a couple spring practices, you've been there for a full year, you've got your route running down, you understand, all the concepts in the offense, you've got your timing with your quarterbacks down. That's I think where it could really pay off, having him in there, 8 months early or 6 months early next January.
I'm trying to think of what past Buckeyes he reminds me of, and I'm thinking like Santonio Holmes, but on Ted Ginn's frame, where he can do a lot of different things. He's not as strong as Santonio. Santonio was a fantastic blocker, like out of the gate almost, when he got to Ohio State. Obviously he redshirted, but he's probably a little taller than Santonio, and like I said, he's more slight, I would assume, but just a guy who can go over the middle, can do it outside, can make guys miss underneath, and I think the future is pretty bright with that guy. Just get him on the field. And I'm looking at the guys, the freshman receivers this year with Cameron Babb and Cameron Brown and Chris Olave. And like I said, maybe all play the same position, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Cameron Babb maybe do like a KJ Hill H type of thing, because he's a strong guy. He's really good, really agile, can cut, can do all of these different things. A guy that you want to get the ball in his hands and let him do something with it. And he's more explosive than KJ Hill. And I think you could see him there maybe, because if you've got 3 Z's, then that's maybe one too many. And not that they need H's, because you've got obviously DeMario and Jalen Gill on down the road, but like Kyle Morgan, he thinks that maybe this will be the year that DeMario McCall explodes and goes early to the NFL. We'll see. I don't know. Am I crazy, Tom? Cameron Babb as an H-back?
You want to find his place to get these guys on the field wherever it is, and he doesn't really have the size that they look for out of the X position necessarily. So, I mean, if you put him at the H, you're probably assuming that McCall goes next year, because I mean, Jalen Gilk is coming in as a borderline 5-star prospect. You've got McCall, who, for all the world, looks like he is about to have a huge year. So you don't want to, sticking him there gives him a better chance of getting on the field probably than if he's, with 2 other guys in his same class at his same position. If McCall goes and it is like a Jalen Gill and Cameron Babb rotation at H, and a Chris Olave and Cameron Brown rotation at Z, like that's kind of how they've liked doing it the last couple of years. They've kind of have that 6 receiver rotation, 2 guys at each spot, and you can get guys on the field a decent amount and get guys touches if it's just 2 guys at each spot. So, maybe that does make sense, but they just put CJ Saunders on scholarship. So how much is CJ Saunders going to play at H this year?
He's going to play some, because he played some last year, and that was with a quarterback who couldn't even throw the ball. So, actually, I wonder how many of his catches came from Dwayne Haskins.
I think an awful lot, because he had 100 yards in that UNLV game, yeah. And that was, I think, all from Haskins. So, if he only
they roommates?
Maybe it's a Three's Company thing. So if CJ Saunders is a blonde, that makes him Chrissy. So yeah, I don't know. We should probably stop. We should probably change the subject very quickly before we fall down the Three's Company rabbit hole.
You mentioned 2020. I didn't have this in the rundown, but Justin Rogers, a 2020 possible 5-star offensive lineman from Michigan. He's the number 13 player, number 1 offensive guard in 24/7's own rankings. The composite right now is kind of worthless because ESPN and rivals may not have their complete rankings done for 2020. But on Tuesday, he released his top 13. And mind you, he's from Michigan. 1 month ago, he had a top 2 of Ohio State and Georgia, and then a number 3 of Michigan. And in his top 13 this week, there's no Michigan and no Michigan State. And if you were able to stomach last week's show, I think it was last week, Tom, we were talking about the in-state 5-star offensive lineman that Michigan is whiffing on in Devontae Dobbs and Logan Brown. Is that the other guy that went to
he's
Wisconsin?
going to Wisconsin. Yep.
So this is another instance of there's very good talent in Michigan, and none of them, but these top offensive linemen are, I mean, Michigan couldn't even come in 13th. They couldn't even get like 8% of his interest. And I'll let Shannon jump in here first, just because I'm sure he has something to say. Shannon, you feeling bad for Michigan about this?
Oh, extremely. I mean, you've got a lack of offensive line experience, or not really so much experience, but just talent. And yet the ones that you are in your state, you're going to not let walk, not even be able to get them. Yeah. I mean, you had somebody like Michael Jordan who started as a freshman for Ohio State. Good job there, Harbaugh.
It's amazing and almost, I don't know, devastating for Michigan to have players at a position of need not have interest in them. And Tom, just imagine if that was Ohio State, who, whatever position they're lacking, but it's sort of like when Mitch Trubisky and Malik Zaire left state, except this is much worse because this is like right in your backyard. This is an area where they've struggled for years. Now they've got the guy that fixes their struggles, but they've also got the guy in Ed Warner, who is not the best recruiter. And that was one of the criticisms when he was at Ohio State. It's a pretty crazy situation that they can't lock, not that they can't lock the border, Tom, but that there's like no fence anywhere. There's like no border.
Yeah, we went pretty in depth on this last week, but I'm sure if I know our audience, and I'd like to think that I do, I'm sure they won't mind us talking a little bit more about how Michigan is completely fallen off the national college football map. Again, these guys were in kindergarten the last time Michigan was kind of a nationally relevant program, and they were 2-3 years old the last time Michigan won the Big Ten. For people in their 30s and their 40s, you associate Michigan football with Bo Schembechler, big offensive line, Jumbo Elliott, guys who are dominant offensive linemen, leading to the Rose Bowl, going and playing, turning into all pros in the NFL. That hasn't been the case at Michigan for a long time. That is, Michigan football is, you talk to people about Michigan football as an elite program, and it's like talking to them about Netscape as like an elite browser. Like, yes, that was true at one point, but it has not been true for a long time. So, and I mean, I don't know. We'll talk about All or Nothing in a little bit, but you look at that show, and that kind of gives you this look inside their program, and nothing about that program would be all that appealing to me if I was an 18-year-old kid. That no one looks real happy. Harbaugh seems like a weirdo. It seems like there's not a tremendous connection between a lot of the staff and the players there. Like, it seems shocking to everyone who is of a certain age that Michigan can't recruit offensive linemen now. But if you just look at it objectively, they haven't developed offensive linemen particularly well recently. They haven't had on-field success significant on-field success in quite a while. And so it doesn't seem like it's that appealing a place to go to school, just in terms of being in that program. There's just not a ton of energy around that program right now. So there are other more appealing options, several of them in the region. There's another more appealing option in some ways in the state. Michigan State has been a much more successful program over the last 10 years than Michigan has. So, and that's the time frame that these kids remember. They don't remember Bo Schembechler. They probably don't remember Lloyd Carr for the most part. Michigan football to them is Rich Rod and Brady Hoke and Jim Harbaugh and losing every year to Michigan State and Ohio State. That is what Michigan football is to recruits these days. So, yeah, you're seeing that play out right now.
And those offensive linemen can see Jack Conklin go from Michigan State to the NFL and be an all-pro. as a rookie. So speaking of one of those other options, Urban Meyer and a bunch of other coaches, including Jim Harbaugh, were this past weekend at the Sound Mind, Sound Body Camp, I believe it was. And it's held in Detroit, and all players from the region come in. And I think it might all also been mixed in with the Best of the Midwest Combine this year. I believe it's the same event where Brady Hoke and Urban Meyer had barbecue together a few years back. But at this particular event, the coaches all talked to the players, to the campers, and Urban Meyer, he was talking to the players about performing against your rival and having success against your rival. And he's doing this while Jim Harbaugh is, 30 feet away, arms folded across his chest, listening. And it blew up on Twitter and the internet for obvious reasons. But it was, there aren't a lot of instances of this kind of, is it like peeing on somebody's territory, or just, Tom, is it bullying? Is it like, taking somebody's head and giving them a swirly in their home toilet?
To go into Detroit and have that conversation, I'm sure everyone in that room is already well aware, but you're still kind of dunking on him in his home court. So I'm sure I'm sure Harbaugh was sort of sitting there seething. I have seen snippets of other Urban Meyer speeches where he has talked about similar things before. So I don't think this was necessarily I think this was a more standard coaches clinic speech than, a lot of people have been kind of hyping it up to be, but that also doesn't mean it's not funny. Like you're still, I'm sure that the meaning of the speech was not lost on Jim Harbaugh, and I'm sure he was not sitting there with his heart filled with joy as he listened to it.
Shannon, did you have something you would like to say about this?
Well, we know that during this, Harbaugh was not of sound mind and sound body, happening to listen. I mean, especially when Urban Meyer is wearing his 2014 national championship jacket. I mean, let's not forget that fact. So, I don't think it was on purpose as far as just like, stomping on a grave or anything, but it's just, he's keeping it real. And a lot of people think that a lot of Michigan fans are saying, oh, this was classless and, Urban's just arrogant. Guess what? Darn well, if the roles are reversed, what would be happening if this was in Columbus and Harbaugh was 6-0 against Ohio State? That he'd be sitting there gloating, but he would take it a step further because he's Harbaugh. So, I mean, it just beat Ohio State. Then you can have something to talk about.
In terms of the rivalry, it's a pretty baller move, but I still think the best is the Jim Tressel. Well, let's not put it on Tressel, I guess, but probably we should. And the bomb sniffing dogs in 2004 in Ohio Stadium with forcing Lloyd Carr and his Wolverines to go through that rigmarole. But then the best part is when Tressel and Lloyd Carr meet at midfield before the game. Tressel says, something to the effect of, "Did you get in okay? Like, have any problems? Huh?" Wink, to be able to just be probably responsible and then have the balls to be like, "So how did that thing go that I set up that I'm totally not the person who set up?" And Lloyd Carr just having to be like, "Well, it wasn't fun, or there was this and there was that." But I mean, I think that's right up there. But I still say that I don't have any sympathy for Lloyd Carr there because, and maybe this is just my recollection of things, and maybe this isn't how it happened, but in 1996 on Senior Day, I think it was Greg Belisari was being introduced on Senior Day, and Lloyd Carr sent his team out, and I'm pretty sure they may have, the way I remember it was all of the Belisaris got run over by Michigan. It probably wasn't so violent, but for some reason, I just have this memory that they weren't done introducing the seniors and Michigan came out onto the field. So there's always going to be that, you sort of reap what you sow in this rivalry.
The Belisari family also got run over by Michigan in 1999 and 2000. So,
and 95.
not
license
a
plate
great
on that one said Biaka Batuka.
Just said 21. I don't know what that means. Yes, yeah, that was. I when I worked in Detroit, I worked at the TV station where Bo Schembechler taped a pregame show on the ABC affiliate there that aired before, whatever the noon ABC game was. And so I would get a chance to talk to him every Friday when they taped it during football season. And I was up there in 2004 and I talked to him, before they were taping their bowl special or something. And just was, talking to him about the Ohio State Michigan game. And he, was very complimentary about, Ted Ginn and Troy Smith and, all that. But oh man, was he not a fan of the bomb sniffing dog thing? Oh man, he was. That is the only time. I mean, Bo was sort of renowned for his legendary temper, and he was in the 3 years I think I was up there. I talked to him every week. It was always a lot of fun. It was always a great conversation. That is the only time he was mad, and oh man, was he mad about that. That did not go over well with Bo Schembechler.
Get in all right. It reminds me of like my brother and I used to go ahead.
That is just such a absolutely hilariously trollish comment, because it's like it's so it's just like, oh yeah, nice day. Like you can say that in such a way that it doesn't mean anything, and it's just like, oh yeah, have a good drive in, like yeah, but he knew and Lloyd knew, and that's what's really important. That is just such a knife between the ribs comment.
Like when my brother and I were kids, we would, at the dinner table, we'd always have a glass of milk with dinner, like all kids from Ohio. But when the other wasn't looking, we'd put some random food in the milk, like and I'd put something in his milk, like a slice of cheese or something, or who knows what. But because it's milk, and as long as it sinks to the bottom, you don't know it's there until you're done drinking it. And so, anytime one of us would be like, so how's your milk? You'd be like, oh crap, what did you put in it? And that was pretty much what Jim Tressel did. He put, random food stuffs in Lloyd Carr's milk, and then, in the entire team's milk. And that's, that props to Jim Tressel. We know he loves the rivalry. And that was that's a move that will live forever, still lives forever. I was reading Lloyd Carr's entire rant about that this week, and it was, he's probably still not happy about it. Speaking of Michigan, Tom, you know what time it is?
The very best time. I am so sad that this is the last one. We should just go back and just next week start reviewing episode 1 again.
See what we missed.
Yeah. Well, there are some episodes where there's just so much going on, but today we are talking about All or Nothing episode 7, the final episode, the episode where there's the Ohio State aftermath that they kind of gloss over, and then bowl preparation and things like that. There's more John O'Corn, which is good, but Tom, everything with John O'Corn is so forced. I don't know if fake is the right word, but it seems like he views this entire show as improv on what he thinks he should be saying, but he's terrible at improv, and he just repeats things that he's heard other people say. Like, when you don't know any jokes, but you try to tell jokes that you've heard before, but you don't get them quite right, and they don't land. Like, nothing he says lands, be it when he's talking to his buddy in Houston, plays for the Houston Texans, I guess. And I just imagine before that phone call, every time before he calls him, because he's called him a few times in the series, I'm thinking the producer or whoever is with him at that point is like, okay, John, now call up your NFL friend and be said, but also still be upbeat with your words because there's a possibility that things are going to be okay for you.
See, that scene was my personal favorite of the entire episode because that call with his friend from the NFL opened with him being concerned that his play in the Ohio State game might hurt his chance to play in the NFL. I like John O'Korn a lot personally after the show, so I'm going to say this as nicely as possible. I don't think that changed his chances of playing in the NFL, put it that way.
That's well put, Tom.
It was just one little. I was worried we weren't going to get any more John O'Korn because I knew Brandon Peters played in their bowl game. I was worried that we were just that was going to be it, and he was just going to kind of fade away out of our lives, and we'd never see him again. But we did. We got a good dose of O'Korn. It wasn't the best O'Korn, but it was just nice to have him back in our lives one more time.
I liked where they're in the bowl game. And Brandon Peters goes down, and they're like, O'Korn's got to come in. And so then Mark Harmon, the narrator, is like, they try to build it up like, is this where John O'Korn redeems himself? Is this where he, finishes his career, blah, blah, blah. And then he throws a pass in the flats, and then he comes out. It's just like, wah, wah.
Win this one for Brandon.
100% completion percentage. That was, that's can you do better than that? No. Closing his career on a perfect performance.
True. That's church, man.
I like how he said that.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I like how he said that being invited to the NFL PA Collegiate Bowl was doing wonders for his confidence and his focus. Like, really? Okay.
Yeah, I was waiting for him to stumble over some words and be like, line. And then they would feed him what he was supposed to say. After the Ohio State game, I think it was Jim Harbaugh said we just weren't mature enough. And I'm thinking, you had a fifth-year starting quarterback. You've got all of these offensive linemen. A lot of, I don't know, just weren't mature enough to be able to make the plays at the end when you had to, I guess. But, Tom, if you got a fifth-year starter at quarterback, no matter, yeah, he's not great, but, it wasn't maturity to me. Although, you know what? A lot of that, maybe it is maturity because I'm watching this and everything I see from Rashawn Gary, it doesn't instill confidence in me that he is a guy who can be relied upon to lead. And I think it's pretty unfair to say that about a true sophomore, but there are just some instances in this entire series, Tom, that leave me wanting more out of somebody so talented in terms of, do you build around him? Can you build around him? Is he the guy to bring everybody together?
We've touched on this a couple times, I think, but it seems like there's not like a true leader on that team. Like they don't have the guy who was like a JT Barrett or a Billy Price, like stand up in front of the locker room, make an impassioned speech. Like they didn't have that guy, which, that sort of comes with playing three quarterbacks and, splitting time with a couple of running backs. And, Rashawn Gary just doesn't seem like he's that kind of guy. Like he's not, the impassioned speech kind of guy. He's a heck of a player, but he's just not that, some guys are just not wired to be that kind of vocal locker room leader type guy. And I think that's something that they've really missed last year. And, I don't know. I don't know what Shea Patterson is like in the locker room, and maybe he is the, take charge of the locker room, be sort of the man in the program kind of guy. But if not, Brandon Peters doesn't seem like that kind of guy. I don't know who that is for them this year. And that really seems like something that they probably missed last year.
They may have to get that from outside. Maybe that is Shea Patterson, because like you said earlier, and we've said this before, nobody looks like they are the kind of people who are fired up to be there. And maybe you have to have somebody come in from the outside who hasn't been, I don't know, beaten down is probably not the right word, but I don't know, reconditioned to be such automatons. I don't know. I can't imagine like JT Barrett meshing in this program, or what he would do is probably everybody would have to redesign themselves around him. He would change people. And so no matter what you think about JT and his arm and his abilities, the leadership was there. He had people who would follow him. And there's nobody there. There's none of the quarterbacks say anything with meaning, or it's not taken with taken to heart, or it's all very, very hollow and forced. And maybe Shea Patterson can change that. He needs to change that, because if they're just the same old, then you're going to have to execute, because you're not going to have the drive or the faith in each other to get it done. So you better be just better than everybody else and not run into the type of adversity that we've seen JT Barrett help the Buckeyes through, and other guys help the Buckeyes through. And there's just not a lot of leadership or guys that you point to and say, because even Devin Bush, who I think is a very good player, and maybe we just didn't see it, but there's not, the only people who are talking is the quarterback and the coaches. So I'm thinking there's a lot of just selective editing, because maybe whatever the players are saying that just isn't interesting to them, or there's too many F-bombs. I don't know. I did find the where they're showing Rashawn Gary going to class, and the professor's very effusive and is, thank you for taking my class. Thank you for taking my class. I'll see you on New Year's Day on television.
Yeah, that was another thing where they edited that. Like, it was, they made a point a couple times about how seriously he takes his academics, and I'm sure we saw 30 seconds out of a 20-minute presentation or something, but they did not edit that in a way that made him look like, I take my academics very seriously. It was like some very, like, a Hallmark card kind of, I don't know, just kind of very fluffy, sugary, kind of not much, and that was it. So I chalked that up to the editor or the producer did not do him any favors, because I can't imagine that, some sort of class you're taking is a junior, presumably in your major, you could get away with a presentation like that. So you always have to kind of take with a grain of salt, like, what you're seeing is probably not necessarily exactly reflective of what's actually there. But, in a context like that, you're just seeing a little snippet of it, and they're just trying to show you, yes, he gave a presentation in class. In the case of, like, no one standing up and giving speeches in the locker room, like, the cameras are there in the locker room. They have microphones there. If someone's standing up there giving crazy impassioned speeches before games or at halftime or whatever, you would show that, because that is compelling video. The fact that they didn't show that tells me that they probably didn't have that because it didn't happen.
And I think that's the conclusion that we draw, and because we've talked about it before. There's so much of that lacking, and you would think that they would. That's the sort of stuff that you do these football shows for, to have those moments, because we don't get to see the locker room. So that's stuff that we want to see. You have that access. Why would you not show it? I thought, like, every question and answer, every interview session with even the players is painful, because they just, Shannon, they look like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world than inside those walls.
Yeah, it seemed very, uncomfortable, and I don't know why. I just, that last episode, it just, a lot of it I thought was kind of funny, as far as, just something simple like how Harbaugh was so happy to put these players up on the walls of, their athletic field inside, and they only had a few boxes from, like, the best plays or whatever from the season. It just doesn't make any sense in the way things are run over there. It just seems laid back, and I don't know.
Yeah, I found that odd as well. And the one that he put up, one of the best plays of the season was, I assume, a field goal, which, think of that what you will, as one of your plays of the season being a field goal. But yeah, he's helping to put these fatheads on the walls. And I'm thinking, and props to him, I guess, for having this hands-on thing. I can't imagine Urban Meyer doing any of that. You know, unboxing stuff, putting it on a wall. I mean, he's got people for that. But I also like that aspect of Jim Harbaugh to be so hands-on. He's picking up trash afterwards. And, I like that, but it just seemed odd, Tom.
Yeah, and you never know, is he doing that when the cameras aren't there? You never know. Cause they're paying you $7 million a year. That is probably not the best use of your time. Like go make a phone call and recruit someone, go watch some film, go whatever. Like that, you don't need to spend 20 minutes doing that. There are more productive things you can be doing with your time. The thing while we're talking about before they go to the bowl game, they had shots of blowing snow and like winter and, like blizzard conditions in Ann Arbor. And I'm just watching this going, I bet they signed up for this thinking this is going to be a great recruiting tool. And I don't think that any kid from Florida who's watching this is going, I want to go to school there. That looks great. Like do you think this show has been a net positive or a net negative for that program in terms of recruiting, in the coming years?
Absolutely a negative. And I think I said that last week. There's nothing about the show that would appeal to recruits. And I would say other than, but there's no other than. What about it? Maybe Don Brown, but I mean, that's just a lot of coaches yell. And you just have to look at in the team meeting rooms, the players sitting in the chairs. And granted, that's how most college kids look when they're sitting in lecture rooms, but there's just so little joy. And I know at Ohio State, there's a lot of players that it's not fun. It's constant hard work. There's constant pressure. Your spot is always up for grabs. And if you lose it, you could be out the door. And it's not always, none of it is easy, and it's not necessarily fun, but you still see players having fun. You just check Ohio State football's Twitter account. I mean, they're always putting videos up of celebrities coming in, or players going and doing this, or players having fun, or the coaches messing with the players. You just didn't see any fun from the players. And when you see them in their home lives, they look just as miserable because they're being asked about the football team, which of course you have to be because, the cameras are rolling. It just looks like a miserable time all around. And I can't imagine a 17-year-old kid watching this thinking that's where I want to be. It was definitely not a recruiting ad. It's not an ad for Michigan. If anything, it's an ad for everywhere but Michigan. And maybe they'll put that, a couple $1 million or whatever to good use. But it may have to be like PR to combat the bad PR that this show has created. Now, getting to the bowl game against South Carolina, speaking of bowling, the Bowl-orama scuffle when South Carolina defensive player said, like, I've never seen, talking to Karan Higdon, like, I've never seen you on film or whatever. You don't show up on film. And that's probably the wrong thing to say to the starting running back. And so you see these two teams, not going at it. Maybe one person pushes somebody and then they all, disperse or whatever. But again, like we talked about last week, Tom, Michigan's trash talking, and not that they were necessarily trash talking, they were just responding to it. But Chase Winovich, again, talks trash in this game and probably shouldn't, but just more instance of a program that talks, but has been unable to back it up, certainly last year.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand why that set Karan Higdon off the way it did. Like, I'm the starting running back, you idiot. Like, do you not watch film? Do you not start? Or are you like a walk-on who doesn't watch film? Like, I don't understand why that would set him off. It's not like he had a bad season last year. He had a couple 200-yard games. So, yeah, I didn't quite get that. But yeah, I was kind of looking forward to that because I had heard about that at the time, and I was interested to see how that was portrayed. The other thing that I thought was interesting from their time in Tampa that I had forgotten about is they practiced at Berkeley Prep. Does anyone know the significance of Berkeley Prep? The high school.
Tom, tell us.
Indeed. Why don't you see if you can prove that you know?
No, I'm just letting you finish your thought.
It's the high school that Nicholas Petit-Frere, who's the offensive tackle, who was one of the top, I think he was the top offensive tackle in the 2018 class. That's where he went to high school. Michigan was after him hard. And in the same way that they often had their satellite camps, coincidentally, at the site of, high schools where they had, a recruit in the following year's class. In this case, they practiced at the high school where Nicholas Petit-Frere went last year, and Nicholas Petit-Frere ended up going to school at anyone?
The Ohio State University?
Indeed, the Ohio State University. So, yeah, the Michigan recruiting apparatus, they sure did try hard, but it did not work out. I had forgotten about that. I think we had talked about that at one point, right after Petit-Frere signed with Ohio State, that Michigan had their practices there, but I had forgotten about that. It just had sort of slipped my mind, and I saw it, and I just started laughing, like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Whoops, that didn't work out very well.
But he was an offensive lineman, so we should have assumed that he was not going to go to Michigan. The was it John O'Corn, or was it maybe it was Peters, who before the game said, talking about how they have to win this game because it's not a good luck to lose 3 in a row. And
that was Chase Winovich,
then,
wasn't it?
Of course.
I think that was Chase Winovich.
Yeah, there you go. Oh gosh, more. When he's yelling at the South Carolina quarterback, telling he's going to come get him, and I don't. Every time he sort of opens his mouth on the football field, or when he's talking about football, it doesn't go well for him. And I guarantee he's not going to change at all this year either. Now that he's back, and he's going to be very good. But this year he needs to, I guess, finish those words with tackles and sacks, and not with head in your hands after the game. Was it after the South Carolina? Not even when the game was still going on, but Rashawn Gary's got his head in his hands. This is after Michigan got out to like a 19-3 lead or something like that, and they gave up the lead. And Rashawn Gary's got his head down, and a teammate has to come over and tell him, hey, the game is this thing isn't over. Get your head up. And so that was another instance of Gary that wasn't in the best light. Not that he's trouble or anything like that. It just, I guess I want to see more out of him. Maybe I want to see him as vocal as Chase, but maybe make those words matter instead of coming back to haunt them. I know we're jumping around from post-game to pre-game, but I thought Jack Harbaugh's pre-game speech, where I lost track of who the fighter was. He was talking about 2 boxers, and one boxer is getting punched in the ribs, and he's getting his ribs broken, and this is happening and that's happening, and then who won, and you've confused me, Jack. But his speech pretty much predicted what was going to happen to Michigan in terms of Michigan threw the first punch, and they bloodied South Carolina's nose, got up to a big lead, but they didn't go in for the kill. They didn't knock South Carolina out. And then, Shannon, we saw South Carolina come back in that game and hand Michigan another loss.
Yeah, it was 19-3 in the mid-third quarter when everything Pep said that he didn't feel great about the play, and Harbaugh standing there, and he's like,
oh, gosh,
who's that in the backfield? And afterwards, he's like, I should have called a timeout. Well, duh. Led to a turnover, and then the very next play, the defense gives up a touchdown. It's now 19-10. I mean, you still got 2 scores, but then they go over to Gary and Winovich on their sideline, and Gary says, if we don't let them score again, we'll win the game. Well, that's usually how math works. Just one quick thing I wanted to point out. You said that that the coaches don't have fun and everything like that for Michigan. I mean, who doesn't want to go play for a coach who reenacted Lion King? I I mean, that's fun, isn't it?
You mentioned Jack Harbaugh. R.I.P. your mentions.
My point.
You mentioned Jack Harbaugh earlier. Jack Harbaugh is 1,000 times more compelling as a speaker than Jim Harbaugh or John Harbaugh. Like, I don't know if that's one of those things that like skips a generation or something, but John Harbaugh.
Maybe their mom is really boring.
That could be. John Harbaugh is their dad is Jack Harbaugh, former football coach, and their mom is a cardboard box with nothing printed on the side. That's their family tree. John Harbaugh, a couple of episodes ago, we saw him when they were playing Maryland. He's the coach of the Baltimore Ravens, and he got up and gave a speech, and he just talked about how they like football players who like to play football because they want to win football games. And it was like, what? This is what? And Jim Harbaugh, this season, the analogies this season have been they were going to be like a rocket ship at the beginning of the year, but not a particularly exciting rocket ship. And then you had to be careful not to make mistakes because it would be like falling down the stairs with his kid. And then last week there was an analogy about how emotion was great because his kid was crying during a football game. And like, how did the two of you grow up in a house with this guy who's telling this kind of convoluted but still incredibly interesting story about a boxing match and telling it in an incredibly exciting way? And then you came out with mayonnaise on cardboard for two kids. Like, I don't understand how that's possible.
Well, you're looking at it. That run play that Shannon mentioned, where I don't know if it was a hurry up or I don't even think it was. It's just Sean McCune, who's normally their tight end. Whatever formation Tim Drevno calls the run plays, so I don't know that came from Harbaugh, but Tim Drevno calls the run plays, and he calls a fullback carry, but the tight end is in the game at that point instead of the fullback. So the tight end lines up as the fullback, and of course he doesn't know how to take a handoff, and he fumbles. And I remember at the time, Michigan fans went ballistic at such a terrible play call, and I don't understand how you should never call a play without knowing who it is that the play is designed for. And if, for one, let's stop calling fullback runs. Let's just stop doing that. For two, never call a fullback dive or whatever you want to call it. Never call a run for the fullback if the fullback is actually a tight end. I'm not some, offensive wizard, some guru, but I know I don't want to hand the ball off to my tight end in that manner. I could do maybe an option pitch to Rashad Berry. That's about as far as I'm going to go. I'm not going to hand the ball off to my tight end. And that way, when the game is certainly on the line and in territory that is not in your favor, that was one of that was a Tim Drevno moment and another reason why they are better for him not being there anymore. But that still
maybe that was something that Harbaugh could have worked on during the 20 minutes he was hanging fat heads. Maybe write down on the chalkboard, don't hand the ball to tight ends.
You know how Urban has, like, he writes down all of the playmakers, like my top 10 or top 20 playmakers on offense that we have to get the ball. I bet with the tight ends, like none of it is he thinking, I got to get this guy some carries. Whatever we do, let's find a way it'll be a great matchup against the defense. They'll never see it coming. It's just an inexcusable mistake.
The only exception to this is the idea that you floated last week, which was Robert Landers as fullback. I am still on board with both feet in on that one. Like, when you say never give the ball to a fullback, except when it's Robert Landers.
Well, I'd say he's more of a big tailback.
I think of a scat back, a really, really big scat back.
Was there anything else in this episode? I like the postseason or the after season. I forget what they call it, but they just have
their banquet or whatever.
Banquet, basically. And John O'Corn is talking, and he says, I'm so excited to watch Brandon Peters lead this team next year. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but there's no Michigan fan that is like has any thought that it's going to be Brandon Peters this year. But at that time he was the bee's knees, to use another current reference. And now it's like, we just hope that he's a capable backup, because this is Shea Patterson's team, and we're all better for it. The final scene as well was quite fitting, and that was after like the post credits or whatever, where they're all going over to whoever's house, and one of the players just walks into the screen door, and it was just I guess a microcosm of the season for Michigan, and Tom, and you'll know this, it wasn't put there, it's put there with purpose. I mean, yeah, it's funny, but it's also kind of here it is in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a pretty common movie making thing. You throw a little something like that at the end, like just a little Easter egg kind of thing at the end. And yeah, it was kind of 2017 Michigan football .gif in one neat little package there. The way they actually wrapped the series up was kind of, it was a little eye rolling. The narrator at one point said, season was one that proved that more is proved about a man by his response to defeat than his reaction to victory. Which, yes, that is one takeaway from the season, but they lost their last 3 games. So how would you characterize their response to defeat? I wouldn't say it was great. So I don't know if that was a takeaway. And then Harbaugh at the end, talking about how, this season will be judged by what kind of people, these guys are in 30 years, and fathers and husbands and stuff. And everyone kind of says that. But when Ohio State says that, it's like, yeah, we went 11-1, and, also we're trying to develop them. And with Harbaugh coming off a season like that, it comes off a little bit like the Butch Jones, champions of life thing that he had last year, which worked out great for him at Tennessee, went over really well. It's the kind of thing that if you're winning, then that seems very genuine. And if you're losing, that seems like, it's just a game. It doesn't really matter. It was just sort of a weird note to end the season, the series on, I thought.
Yeah, it was odd. It was, I don't know, it was a postscript that was like, whatever, the show ended the previous week, in my opinion, and they tried to cramp so much into that last episode. Shannon, any other thoughts on All or Nothing that you wanted to get out there?
No, not that I could think of. I think we pretty much covered everything. It just, when Peters throws that interception to end the game, it just was fitting as far as just the way everything is for that team.
Yeah, but what a recruiting tool. I'm sure right now at the football facilities, there's 16 and 17-year-olds beating down the door.
Oh yeah,
to be part of.
They want to join
what they saw.
They want to join a team they've only beaten one team with a winning record since October of 2016, and haven't beaten a team on the road with a ranked opponent on the road since 2006, Notre Dame. But yeah, they're going to the national championship because they're going to just get over those odds in just one quick season.
I haven't watched any of the Last Chance U seasons on Netflix, but from what I've seen from recruits, that is more of a recruiting draw than this one. Now, I'm not saying you're going to start seeing a bunch of Michigan kids, go to junior college, but there are ways to edit stuff that makes it look better than it is, and maybe that's what they did here, and maybe they made it look as good as they could.
With Gary and the school stuff, and the word coming out that Kareem Walker is one of the kids leaving Michigan, what are your thoughts on, is Michigan saying that they have such a great education and it's school's hard there, basically? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think they're over the limit, and so players had to leave, as we see in Columbus every year. Kareem Walker, he's the guy that was never really, first of all, he had academic issues from the outset. As a freshman, they told him to basically take the year off of football and just get your books in order. And so he was doing that ish and was played sparingly last year. And I don't know, he's been there for so long, and he came in the same year as Antonio Williams, because Kareem Walker was committed to Ohio State when Ohio State then decided, you know what, we're tired of your waffling, so we're just going to go get Antonio Williams. So, but yeah, at one time he was a 5-star guy, the number 1 running back in the nation. And if you look at his junior film, I was looking back at my tweets to see what I was saying about him at the time, and he reminds me of Melvin Gordon when he was going crazy at Wisconsin. My tweet said he reminded me of Darren McFadden, and so those are two pretty outstanding running backs, and that's what his junior film looks like. As a senior, it looked completely different. I don't know what happened. But then, he gets to Michigan, and he had maybe 1 or 2 good runs. And when I say good runs, I'm talking, like 10 yards instead of a loss of 2. And he never really played. And so they're not really losing anybody that they were counting on in terms of Kareem Walker. I think the bigger loss, if it's true, is Kakoa Crawford, the wide receiver, who had a couple of big plays against Ohio State last year. But, Walker, Tom, all that does is it just thins out a thin running back room, where right now the number 3 guy, Jim Harbaugh said this week, was walk-on True Wilson.
Yeah, that's not a position you want to have depth issues at, because that's a place where you can, it's not hard for a guy to tweak a hamstring or, get hit wrong or fall wrong or, do something with their wrist. I mean, Mike Weber had a hamstring injury at the beginning of last year and a wrist injury at the end of last year, and and that's a pretty common thing with running backs. That's a physically demanding position, so you need to have good depth there. So yeah, that's not a spot you want to get too far down your depth chart. They have not recruited particularly well there, because they had a whole bunch of running backs there last year, but it was like Ty Isaac, who was a transfer. Chris Evans and Karan Higdon both had, pretty decent years, but neither of them were like, the old traditional bell cow running back who was, running for 1,500 yards or anything like that. Kareem Walker, I looked up his career stats: 20 carries, 68 yards, 1 touchdown last season. So, that's not great production from a guy who you brought in, who was, the number 1 recruit in his position when you were recruiting him. Michigan has had 2 big running back, quote unquote, wins over Ohio State in recruiting in recent years. Kareem Walker, who, you just explained sort of what happened there, and Derek Green, who was a 5-star running back prospect at one point, who grew up a huge Ohio State fan, wore number 27 in high school because he was a huge Eddie George fan. And Ohio State just never really engaged with him. He really wanted to come to Ohio State. And, a lot of times people will say, oh yeah, the school, really, kind of backed off of him. And it's sort of like, well, did they really, or was he not really interested? Derek Green at one point just basically tweeted like, yeah, Ohio State isn't interested in me. Like, he just flat out came out and said it. So, and so then he goes to Michigan, and he had 3 seasons, and it was 212 carries, 898 yards, 7 touchdowns. So it was basically 300 yards and a couple touchdowns per season. So in over 3 seasons, that's just, it was just kind of like, yeah, he was like the 3rd-ish running back there, and that was about it. They just, part of that is probably, we've talked about their offensive line issues and how they haven't really developed great offensive lines in the past few years, and they haven't had great quarterbacks to, force defenses to back up a little bit. But their running backs have just not been impressive for quite a while, it seems like.
Well, even, we talk about Chris Evans, who is a junior, going to be a junior this year. I'm pretty sure Ohio State offered him as a corner. Karan Higdon was at one point committed to Iowa and was like a last-minute flip to Michigan. And they've got a couple of 3-star running backs. So it's, yeah, but then it goes back to what you're saying about the offensive line. What are they seeing? You're seeing running backs like Fitzgerald Toussaint, Devion Smith, guys who average. They're just average. Who was the last? I really liked Brandon Miner, but he could never stay healthy. Mike Hart was a long time ago. I mean, he's a college football coach now, so that means nothing to anybody. So yeah, they need to get that back on track. Man, I thought you were going to keep going on the, they haven't done the offense. They haven't recruited offensive line well. They haven't recruited quarterbacks well. They haven't recruited, like Tom. We've got to go on to the show. I mean, we've got to keep, we've got to keep this thing moving.
I mean, their receiver recruiting's been pretty good recently. I mean, you've got Donovan Peoples-Jones, you got Tariq Black. I mean, those are both young guys who are probably going to be pretty good receivers this year. But I mean, every time they've had a competent quarterback the last couple of years, it's been a guy who transfers in, Jake Rudock, and now they're on their knees praying every night that Shea Patterson can do something decent this year. So, yeah, I mean, there are some pretty serious systemic issues, whether it's in player evaluation or development or both. There are some real serious systemic issues there that have not gotten resolved over the past decade, probably spanning several coaches. And that is a school and a program that is known sort of for inertia. And, they have done things the Michigan way, and the Michigan way does not seem like it's working right now.
They're competing with Iowa and teams like that for their running backs. And you've got to be able to spot them and then develop them. And you can see the difference in the programs at Ohio State and Michigan. Just looking at the running backs, there's a huge difference. I know Michigan fans will tell you that Karan Higdon is better than Mike Weber, and maybe he is. But, there's another in-state guy that Michigan desperately needed, and now he's Ohio State's number 2 option. And Ohio State goes to Texas and gets J.K. Dobbins. They go to Missouri and get Ezekiel Elliott. Go to Florida and get Carlos Hyde. And these are all guys that not necessarily the number 1 running back in the nation, but they're also not like fighting Purdue or Iowa or Georgia State for any of these guys. A lot of times they spot them first, or they're the first major program to spot them. And I know Urban Meyer loves to talk about Michigan State and Wisconsin, the way they can evaluate talent. But Ohio State's pretty good at it too. And you see that we'll see what happens with Master Teague. He was a 3-star guy when Ohio State offered, and he committed, and then he started to rise up the rankings. And that happens for pretty much every Ohio State commit if they're a 3-star. If they're a 5-star, totally the opposite. But go ahead.
You mentioned Ezekiel Elliott. Ezekiel Elliott was the guy that Ohio State took over Derek Green in that recruiting class. And Derek Green was rated higher than Ezekiel Elliott was. So, I mean, that was not like, now that looks like, well, yes, obviously you would take Ezekiel Elliott over this Derek Green guy. But at the time, that was not at all an obvious choice. And that was something that, there was some consternation about that from Ohio State fans. Why are we not taking this kid? We're taking this guy from Missouri. Like, who knows? Missouri, that's not a great football state. Why are we taking this kid over this higher rated guy who really wants to go here? So, again, whether that was evaluation or just development, Ohio State, their player development knows, and their player personnel department knows what they're doing. And I don't think that Michigan, you can give that benefit of the doubt right now.
And, not only did Ohio State want Ezekiel Elliott as a running back, Notre Dame offered him as a safety. They wanted him to play in the secondary. And had they offered him as a running back, he's probably going to Notre Dame. So that there's another, and even at the Army All-American game, they had him on defense a little bit and maybe threw a pass to him. And so, credit Ohio State for seeing these guys and being able to project what they will eventually become.
If you remember Ezekiel Elliott covering a kickoff against Purdue as a freshman, Ezekiel Elliott as a safety might have been pretty fun to watch too. It worked out fine the way it did, but go look up. I'll find it and tweet it out, so you can just find me on Twitter, and I'll have the video of Ezekiel Elliott laying some Purdue dude out on a kickoff in like 2013, 12.
Yep.
Yeah.
13.
Just laying some dude out He could, you could put him at center field, and he could he probably would have vaporized some receivers on post routes. So that probably would have worked out too.
And where can we find you on Twitter?
I am at Tom Orr 4, TOMORR 4.
All right. Since we're talking about Michigan recruiting, let's go to listener questions, because the first one leads kind of right into it.
Yeah, this one's from Zedia. Bigger threat this year to Ohio State, Penn State or Michigan? Biggest threat over the next 5 years, Penn State or Michigan?
Tom, I don't know that these are separate answers, and because right now the trend is not going in the right direction for Michigan. The bigger threat this year is Penn State, because I guess it depends on how you think of the question. I think Michigan is probably more talented, but their schedule is such that I don't know that they'll be in contention as long as Ohio State and Penn State will be, because their schedules are a bit easier. And plus, Penn State hosts Ohio State and a whiteout, most likely, 8 p.m. kick or on whatever network it'll be on. But that to me is the bigger threat this year. That's what threatens Ohio State. But, like we talked about last week, Michigan is still the bigger game, because you still need that win. You can't lose late. Over the next 5 years, for me, Tom, it's Penn State, because we were just talking about recruiting. Penn State is getting guys that everybody else wants. Although I was pretty shocked. Right now, if you look at the 24/7 composite, the Big Ten ratings, I believe Michigan in 2019 is first, Ohio State maybe second, and then Penn State is like third. But the way the evidence that we've seen so far leads us to believe that Penn State is going to continue. And if Michigan can't even get the best guys from in-state to stay in state, they're going to have to start reaching out of state. And those reaches is where the depth takes a hit, and where you've got guys backing up Rashawn Gary and Chase Winovich that can't play, or not that they can't play, but they're not ready. And you got guys on the offensive line that you can't trust, and you've even got starters that you can't trust. So yeah, for me, Tom, it's Penn State on both, and just depending on how that first question is considered.
That's exactly what I had. It's the second question on the 5-year horizon. It's Penn State, and it's not even a discussion right now. They're recruiting better. They're playing better. There's no real indication that trend is going to change. I mean, Michigan is, if they're ahead in the composite right now, they were ahead in the composite this time last year, and then their class completely imploded because their season imploded. And, that is going to a game at Penn State. If you're a recruit, you're going to go to the Ohio State game, and it's going to be a whiteout, and it's going to be a great atmosphere, and it's going to be an exciting game. If you're a Michigan recruit this year, the Michigan Stadium experience does not compare to that as an event. Michigan we talked about it ad nauseum. They have a difficult schedule this year. They've got a pretty decent team, but they play Notre Dame, they play Michigan State, they play Ohio State, they play Penn State, they play Wisconsin. That's 5 losable games. Like, you could be a top 15 team and lose 3 to 4 of those games. And then, congratulations, you're like 3rd or 4th in the division again. So, where you are in recruiting right now is not necessarily indicative of where you're going to be in recruiting this time, when it actually matters. Kansas had a couple really highly ranked players and was ranked in like the top 5 classes this time last year. And, they finished up by being Kansas. So, I think 5-year horizon, Penn State, no question. This year, you can read that question in a way that it's Michigan. Michigan, has a loss to Michigan would be far more devastating to Ohio State's season than a loss to Penn State. And you could even say that Michigan is more likely to win the division than Penn State. You could read it that way. But, I think Ohio State is in more danger in the game at Penn State than they are the game at home against Michigan.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, what's next, Shannon?
Well, before I go to that, Tom, are you saying that Michigan doesn't know how to close?
I'm saying they need to put more emphasis on recruiting and the Ohio State game and the Outback Bowl. I think that if they put more emphasis on those three things, then they'll do much better this year.
And we didn't even talk about the Charles Woodson thing where he said that Jim Harbaugh didn't emphasize it, or they're not emphasizing it enough. And Jim Harbaugh was asked this past week, are you doing that? And he's like, yes, we emphasize it. Are you sure you're doing it? We emphasize the game. But are you really? Yes, we emphasize the game. And it was just as emphatic as he is after every single speech, after every loss. Like, yeah, we didn't play well enough, and but season's not over. Let's emphasize the game.
We're just not mature enough to make plays.
The natural follow-up question there is, okay, so if you're emphasizing it, then why do you keep falling short? And what's the answer there? The actual answer is because of talent and probably coaching and player development. But I would be interested in what his answer to that question would be.
Maturity.
Needed more fat heads.
And to say the biggest threat this year for Ohio State, I mean, according to Danny Sheridan or whatever his last name is, what USA Today and Vegas Handicapper, I mean, Penn State's going to be a 21-point, game winner over Ohio State. I mean, you lose the running back of the century the running back of this generation, and somehow you're going to just get way better overnight. So, all right, next question.
Yeah, what he said Penn State by double digits this year over Ohio State. And you know what? Maybe I think that's just one of those things you say because that's obviously it's his opinion and that's where he sees it. But yeah, I think we'll get to this later on. I can't see. I wouldn't go, Tom, either way on that game more than double digits for anybody right now.
No, that is not a game that Ohio State is probably still the more talented team. Ohio State has more stability on the coaching staff. Losing Saquon Barkley is one thing. I think losing Joe Moorhead may ultimately be the thing that's more of an issue for Penn State this year. But yeah, but it's a redshirt sophomore, first year starting quarterback on the road, first truly hostile atmosphere he'll face. I wouldn't feel particularly overwhelmingly confident in either direction in that game.
I'm just thinking, if Penn State ever did an all or nothing, that would be so insufferable to me. I just would not want to watch that much James Franklin, and I'm sure he's a nice guy. I just, I don't know that he would have the energy for it, but I don't want to see that much of him. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you guys would love it. Probably. Let's go to the next question.
All right, this one's from Eric N. There are 4 national championship winning coaches active today. Who's the next to join the list? I'm just wondering, before you guys answer, if he forgot Scott Frost won a national championship. So really, isn't there 5?
Very good point. So there are 5. We got Scott Frost, Urban Meyer, Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher, and Dabo Swinney. And I was looking through just my college football magazine, one of them, and looking at the top 25, thinking who it would be. And the first guy that I come to is Kirby Smart at Georgia, because, look how close they got last year. I think Dan Mullen could be another. The one guy, and we were just talking about him, the one guy that I don't even consider, or 2 of them right now, are Jim Harbaugh and James Franklin. I don't know where they would rank. Maybe if we did a top 20, James Franklin I assume he'd be in the top 10 somewhere because they've been close to the playoffs. And but for me, Tom, it's Kirby Smart.
Yeah, Kirby Smart was literally like one play away from doing it last year. So yeah, he is for sure the safest bet. I have Chris Peterson on the list. I don't think that Washington is, at the Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson type level, but they've made the playoff. There's a decent chance they'll make the playoff this year. They're at least in contention. And, he's got them rolling to the point where they should be a playoff contending team, at least every other year maybe, and he'll probably be there for quite a while. So he's at least on that list somewhere. He's like James Franklin to me. I had James Franklin down to, he's had them close-ish the last couple of years. So, and he's recruiting well enough that it doesn't look like they're going to be a total flash in the pan. It looks like they should have some staying power. So, I would have James Franklin over probably Paul Chryst on this list in the Big Ten. I would have probably both of them over. I certainly have James Franklin over Jim Harbaugh on this list. Jim Harbaugh and like Mark D'Antonio and Paul Chryst are all kind of for sure out of the top 10 on this list, I would say. I mean, you've got you could make a case for Tom Herman at Texas. You could make a case for Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. But I think that Kirby Smart is for sure the absolute number one answer for everyone.
Yeah, I was looking at Tom Herman and Lincoln Riley as well. I think they still have a little ways to go, especially now with Oklahoma losing Baker Mayfield, maybe losing Kyler Murray to the Major League Baseball draft, which he should absolutely go do and say goodbye to football.
He said today he was going to play. He was going to play football this fall, and that the Oakland Athletics were okay with it. So supposedly they're going to get 1 year out of him. But I mean, we don't know. He was a 5-star prospect, but we don't know what they're going to see out of him. He's a great athlete, but he's far from a guarantee there.
Yeah, I'll say the A's may have allowed it, but they're not okay with it. But you know what? They drafted him knowing that this was. I'm sure they had a talk with him beforehand, and so. But yeah, what about Dan Mullen? I think for some reason I keep looking at the SEC East and thinking, if you get through that, then the whole Alabama waiting for you is tough. But he's a guy that has won as a coordinator, like Kirby Smart, knows what it takes. I think I'm wondering if there's going to be like a resurgence for him as a coach now, because you get out of Mississippi State, which you can only go so far, and he's taken them as far as they can go. I think they were ranked 1 or 2 at one point a couple years ago, and that's not something that is standard there. So with what he can do with the talent that he can get there, I think he's a decent bet. I wouldn't be surprised to see him win it in the next 6 or 7 years, but I think somebody, Tom, is going to get there before him.
Yeah, I thought about him. I thought about Mark Richt at Florida or at Miami. I thought about Willie Taggart at Florida State. I mean, those are all viable answers. Those are all probably top 10-ish answers. Mullen is interesting to me because I think that they might be in a little bit of a deeper hole than people think. And they are significantly behind Georgia right now in the East, and they're not, catching up in recruiting. They're falling further behind in recruiting, if anything, right now. And so then you've got to, get over that mountain. You've got to catch up with and then pass Georgia to win the East, and then you have to deal with Alabama in the SEC championship game, and then you have to win 2 playoff games. That's a pretty tall ask. I don't know that. That's not to say he won't win a national championship there. That's not going to happen this year. That's not going to happen next year. That's probably at least 5 years out from, me thinking that there's a decent chance that Florida wins the SEC and makes the playoff. That's probably a little bit of a building process because their recruiting has fallen off a little bit there. They are not recruiting at the Urban Meyer level, and they have not recruited at the Urban Meyer level for quite a while there. So
yeah,
that's going to be a little bit more of a build than I think people sort of just, people just sort of look at the helmets and, oh, it's the swamp, it's Florida, they'll be good. And they have not been national championship level since Urban left. And they really weren't his last year either.
No, I don't think anybody's ever going to recruit at Florida like Urban Meyer did. I think Dan Mullen will do well, but you're not going to. There's some of those classes, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 5-star guys, and even though, like, I think it was this 2010 class had maybe his best in the rankings, but had a bunch of guys who just didn't pan out. Do you think? Let me ask you, who wins first, Urban Meyer or Kirby Smart?
How many teams is the SEC getting into the playoff every year?
3 to 4.
3 to 4. I mean, The safe, I think, answer is Urban Meyer because the programs are at worst on par, and Ohio State's probably a little bit ahead of Georgia just on overall talent. Like, they had a great year last year, but a lot of stuff fell the right way for them. Ohio State's probably a little ahead of them on talent right now, and has very consistently been recruiting right at that level that Georgia has. They have, they've been in that top 3 classes, 5 years in a row. Georgia had a great class this year, but they have not done that 5 years in a row. So Ohio State's probably a little bit ahead of them right now. And Ohio State is playing Wisconsin in the conference championship game. They're not playing Alabama. So, no, granted, Georgia didn't play Alabama last year either, but that didn't keep Alabama from getting into the playoff. They're not looming there as a potential. Ohio State does not have an Alabama in the West right now. So I think that the answer is probably Urban Meyer, just because it seems like Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State is kind of, you sort of have those 3 penciled in as your 3 of your 4 playoff participants most years, and you're going to be right about at least 2 of them. Georgia probably will get to that point, but if they play Alabama and lose in the SEC championship game this year, I think that's going to be a much harder sell to get 2 SEC teams in again this year. So I think they're going to have to get over Alabama, and that's not the easiest thing in the world to do.
Well, there you go. What's next, Shannon?
Okay, hold on. Got to move my papers. Maybe next time the host can, when he's got one question, have it on one piece of paper instead of straddling 2.
Sorry, we should have talked longer about that last question. We only gave you like 27 minutes to turn the page. My apologies.
My arm went numb holding these 2 pieces.
Please don't ever say straddling again.
Yeah, my arm went numb holding these 2 pieces of paper together. Why not? This is from Smartwater. Why not plan on redshirting Harbill? I can't even spell or pronounce his last name. How bad can the German be at kickoffs, and why waste a second season on a placement kicker who won't score you a point for a second year in a row? If Nuremberg stinks, then Harbill, whatever, takes... Go ahead.
Blake Harbill.
Blake Harbill. Yeah.
Takes the shirt off. Pretty simple logic to me. Not that I butchered it.
Basically, he's asking, why not just redshirt Blake Harbill this year, who will only do kickoffs? And since Sean Nuremberger is doing all of the placements, like, how bad can Sean Nuremberger be on kickoffs that you need Harbill to do it? And I'm interested to talk to Urban about this when we see him next month, because I want to know first off, I want to know what their plan is for kickoffs now that you've got the rule change. It has taken the value out of an accurate placement guy. Maybe what they try to do with Harbill, pinning them inside the 5 and that whole, into that corner. If that's no longer in play, Harbill's value drops significantly. And now you're talking about, well, don't play him this year because then you'll have more time with them as the placement kicker, which is the more important guy, I would argue now, especially with the rule change. So for me, I like this idea because there's no point. If your kicker, if Sean Nuremberger, which he says he can, he says he can do whatever you need him to do on kickoffs. Now this spring, it was just Nuremberger doing placements and Harbill doing kickoffs. But if you're taking the kickoff out of the game, there's no reason, Tom, to play Blake Harbill and to burn this year that he could be better serving Ohio State as a redshirt this year and then the number 1 kicker for 2 or 3 more years.
Yeah, no, you've got that exactly right. I think that's something that I think they will have to certainly look at, because my sort of default assumption, and we're making, I think everyone's making a lot of assumptions about what the strategy is going to look like on kickoffs and how teams are going to respond to, where you're kicking the ball. I think a lot of teams, not everyone, not necessarily like the Penn States or the teams like that sort of view themselves as being on a par with Ohio State, but a lot of the teams like an Oregon State has to know that their athletes are not as good as Ohio State's. So if you can kick the ball down and Oregon State knows they can get the ball in the 25, they may just take the ball on the 25 and not risk getting tackled on the 12-yard line like has happened to a lot of teams against Ohio State's kick coverage the last couple of years. So, if it plays out like that, I think it would be a waste to have him just do kickoffs, unless they're also thinking they need him to make to try field goals over a certain distance. I mean, Nurnberger seems like he has a pretty good leg. I mean, we've seen him hit 50-ish yarders. He hit a 52-yarder or something like that in the spring game. So, he's got a pretty good leg. So that's probably not an issue either. So, barring injury, I think this is a pretty decent idea. But it's going to be real interesting to see how teams respond to those new kickoff rules, because maybe if you're an underdog, if you're a Maryland, Maryland ran back a kickoff for a touchdown against Ohio State last year. So maybe if you're a Maryland, that is one area where you think maybe it's easier for us to try this here than to try driving 75 yards against this Ohio State defense. So maybe teams do keep, trying to return it, and then the kickoff strategy stays the same. But I don't know. I don't know what to expect from that. I've heard a lot of different theories on it, and depending on what teams end up doing, that might change your calculus on what you do with Hallbill.
I am interested to see, because Ohio State wants to force a return. So I'm wondering, will they take more risks to ensure a return? And what you would do then is, do you kick it shorter? Do you kick it more towards the middle of the field? But then you also don't want to take risks. And, where does the scale weigh out? And your desire to pin them inside the 20, but the risk of of giving them extra room means they're more likely to take it out past the 25. And you just wonder, like, at the end of the day, you know what? We'll kick it deep. We know they'll take a fair catch, and then they'll get the ball at the 25. But like you said, with Maryland, with Ty Johnson, although he may not be returning kicks as much this year, there's going to be certain teams where that's going to be part of their plan, is to get as many yards as they can. And then you wonder, how often will coverage teams maybe be caught off guard this year, because they're not necessarily running 100 miles an hour. They're expecting a touchback. And, maybe that's an area where teams can take advantage and get some of these surprise returns. But I don't think at this point, looking at it from where we're looking at it, there's no point for Blake Hallbill to play at this point. What do you got next, Shannon?
All right. This one's from Carpe Mo. Who don't we beat by 14 or more, not counting garbage time, and why?
Tom, I went with 3 teams here, and I probably maybe should have put TCU in here as well. But for me, it's Penn State, Michigan State, and Michigan. Those are three games, 3 teams where you can't expect anything other than a close win. I believe the game is at East Lansing this year, and Ohio State, I think they do better maybe there. But to think that they're going to go in and blow any of these teams out, that's just, for me, it's without seeing anything, without seeing Dwayne Haskins, especially without seeing Ohio State's strong safety, without knowing what the linebackers are going to do. We're just assuming all of these things are going to come into place. And even with those assumptions, I'm still not comfortable saying, yeah, they'll go to Happy Valley and win by 14, or they'll beat Michigan by 14 at home, when this is going to be, we know how the game is. And Michigan State with Brian Lewerke and the defense that they've got coming back, that's going to be a tough one. I expect Ohio State, they could win, should win all 3. But for me, those are 3 games where I'm not comfortable saying 2 touchdowns. TCU, I'm kind of feeling like that will be more, but I wouldn't be surprised, obviously, if it's less. But those are the 3 where I'm like, yeah, there's no good reason right now to say that those are going to be 14-point wins.
Yeah, you got it right. At Penn State, I cannot remember the last time Ohio State really laid it on Penn State at Penn State, like the whiteout night games. I mean, it's probably that Anthony Morelli, Todd Beckman game in like 2007. That I mean, and it hasn't been. It's been very close, very competitive. Even when Penn State was really crap in the early 2000s. In the 2003 game, Ohio State was like a national championship contender. Penn State was just complete garbage, and Penn State was kicking a 60-something yard field goal at the gun to try and win the game. I think Ohio State won like 21-20. That was a game that Granville's own Scott McMullen had to come in and kind of save the day when Craig Krenzel got hurt. So yeah, I've got Penn State, Michigan State. I mean, everyone remembers last year. I mean, I think we all saw that coming last year, the 48-7 or whatever it was. But outside of last year, they did not win by 14 points against Michigan State from 2008 till last year. None of the games were decided by 14 plus. That's always a close game. Michigan is Michigan. You can't ever assume anything about that game really in terms of margin of victory. And TCU just comes down to how conservative they are. That's a first, kind of road start for Dwayne Haskins. They may kind of try and run the ball. I don't think TCU is going to score a ton in that game, but they have a pretty good defense. I mean, Gary Patterson is obviously a fantastic defensive mind. So they may try and limit Dwayne Haskins' exposure a little bit in that game and just kind of keep it, if you get ahead, you kind of throttle it down a little bit and it ends up staying kind of close-ish. So yeah, I think 3 and maybe 4 games, and those are the ones I'd look at.
All right, Shannon, what's next?
All right, final one from TGW. Touch on how good our second team offense is versus other schools. First, Weber or McCall, Tate, Ruckert, etc., possibly getting big minutes when the game is out of hand will be seriously fun to watch.
Tom, I'm thinking there's so many players on Ohio State's team that aren't necessarily second team. They're just the 1B to the 1A, and Mike Weber is one of those guys where he could be in at any time, just like J.K. Dobbins is, and he's just as dangerous. And so when you can make that depth to where it's not first team, second team, it's 1A and 1B, that's where you're really, really good. And that's where Ohio State is at a number of positions, running back, receiver, defensive line. They've been like that at corner. Now you're looking at like second team. Even we don't even know where Jeremy Ruckert right now. He's not on the second team, which gives you another idea of how much talent that Ohio State has right now compared to other teams where, Ruckert you would assume is a guy that's going to come in and play pretty much anywhere. We assume he's going to play here as well, but there's still some guys that he's got to get past. There's nobody else in the Big Ten who has a second running back like Mike Weber. The closest would be Chris Evans at Michigan. And I was writing about the Big Ten running backs this week. Last year against ranked teams, Chris Evans averaged 34 yards rushing per game. Ron Higdon was about, 46 yards, I think, per game against 4 ranked teams. So those are guys that haven't produced against the best teams like Ohio State's running backs have. First, second team. Then you look at DeMario McCall. Is he considered second team, even though he's the number 3 H-back? Because KJ Hill and Paris Campbell are both ones. And that just goes more to the depth that I was talking about, where the lines are blurred between 1 or 2 because, for one, the talent is similar. For 2, they like to have fresh players. And the only way you can have fresh players is if everybody is good enough to play. And I think that's one of the things that Ohio State does. They've got the depth to play more players. And then the guys behind them, that's where, a McCall comes in, or Ruckert, or, Tate Martell, where the guys in the 2s and 3s trying, Tom, to become 1B.
The way I looked at this was, if you take the starting 22, whoever the starting 22 are, off the Ohio State roster, where does that team finish in the Big Ten? And I mean, you touched on it. I mean, a lot of those spots, if you take J.K. Dobbins off the roster, Mike Weber still might be one of the top 2 to 3 running backs in the conference. You might, you still have, let's say it's Benjamin Victor and KJ Hill and Johnny Dixon out there at wide receiver. Like those are 3 of the better wide receivers in the league. Tate Martell, we haven't seen a ton from, but he's probably at least an average-ish quarterback in the Big Ten. And, you've got spots on the offensive line that I think you're more comfortable at than others, but you've got a decent offensive line. You've got incredible depth at defensive tackle, so that's not going to be an issue. You've got, defensive ends. You're taking Nick Bosa and Chase Young off the field. So, okay, then you have Jonathan Cooper at defensive end. That works out okay for you. The linebackers, we've talked about the depth at linebacker this year. And then you've got Jeff Okudah and Sean Wade playing corner. Like that's a pretty good. You have 2 5-star corners on your second team. That's a pretty darn good team. So, I mean, you want to tell me against this schedule this year, how many games does that team win? I have a record written down. You tell me what is that team's record? Just Ohio State's second team playing against their opponents this year.
I would probably, my first thought was 9-3.
Yeah, I was a little more conservative. I said 8-4, but and you lose to Michigan State, Penn State, Michigan, and some combination of TCU or Purdue or Maryland or Nebraska. Like you lose one more somewhere in there because there's some spots on the offensive line I'm not super confident in, and you've got really young guys at safety. I mean, there's some spots that you'd be a little concerned about, but I mean, 8-4, 9-3. Ohio State's backups are like a Capital One Bowl team, or an Outback Bowl team. Like that's pretty darn good.
Yeah, and my biggest hang up there would be the freshman quarterback. If it was, redshirt freshman, I guess, but if it was somebody with experience, then yeah, I could see 9-3, 8-4, because you get the new quarterback in there, and you're probably going to lose a game. Maybe you shouldn't, like JT Barrett against Virginia Tech or whatever. There are teams in the Big Ten who would be so much better with Ohio State's second team. It would raise their talent, even their third team. I could see 9-3 just based on everybody else around them, and then by the time you get to November, when you're playing Michigan State and Michigan, maybe you get one of those guys. You win one of those and secure that record. There's more talent than Ohio State can use at this point almost, and that's where you want to be, and that's where nobody else in the Big Ten is. Where you've got, we just talked about Michigan's number 3 running back is a walk-on. Penn State's number 2 running back is a senior with about 50 career carries who has never really done anything. Michigan State, their number 1 running back is LJ Scott, who, we all like, but still hasn't rushed for 1,000 yards, and he's led his team in rushing 3 years in a row. Has had one good game against Ohio State, and burst onto the scene as a freshman, but has really never been more than just pretty good. You get to a team like Wisconsin where they've got really good guys at the top, but they don't have the depth that Ohio State has. And that's always what separates, we talk about that. That's what separates the group of 5 from the Power 5. And that's what separates Ohio State from the rest of the Big Ten. Anything else? We good?
We've been talking for 2 hours, so I sure hope we're good.
Yeah, I'm good. Shannon, you good?
Yeah, I just want to say a quick thank you to everybody that send condolences and stuff like that for what I've had to go through this last couple of weeks. So I appreciate that. Tip of the hat to you guys.
Tip of the hat, indeed. And Shannon, it was good to have you back.
I appreciate
Tom
that.
said you were missed.
I heard that, but I think that was edited in by you later.
Couldn't have been edited in by me. All right. Yeah, let's call it a night. Thanks everybody for listening. And again, seriously, thanks for sticking with my stupidity with the recording, and hopefully this hasn't been 2 hours of more stupidity, but make sure to check out the rest of the shows on the Ozone Radio Network. Catch us on the ozone.net. Hit us up on Twitter if you need to, and we will talk to you guys next week.
We could steal a car and leave